think about dying?
Hey sis, welcome to the Mama Trauma Barbie podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Wagner, and while I'm tough as a mother, sometimes I know we're all out here, tired of needing to be one. Buckle up as we land the mothership and all things motherhood in the real world. Before we move on, I'd like to thank the incredible sponsors who saw an opportunity to support women in their day-to-day journeys by joining together to make this podcast a reality. Thank you, Precision Chiropractic, Jennifer Pansition with Edward Jones, Dutch Maids, the Avalon Foundation, and Chica Creative for believing in better care, better support, and better outcomes for mamas and their families in the real world. Welcome back as we continue my conversation with Claire Coder, CEO of AntFlow, a patented tampon and pad dispenser company who has raised over $17 million in venture capital funding and who offers product in over 30,000 bathrooms nationwide. Claire's mission is to make the world better for people with periods. Yeah, or even having conversations like this, right? Those avenues where you're able to reach additional people to get, gold out there around how did you do this and what would you change? And so let's jump into that. You had a vulnerable post, as I call it. That's how I refer to it every time I chat with you, but it was amazing. And to give our listeners context, you had done a post on how you almost went bankrupt. And was this about a year or 2 years ago?
Year and a half.
Yeah. And I just remember I messaged you and I'm like, sis, listen, this is like the best thing I've seen in a long time. And you said, you know what? I almost lost some clients from it. So, the hard thing and the right thing are often the same thing. It's one of my favorite quotes. But I would love, if you could, I think everybody looks at you, you're 16, you built this company, it's launched, it's a multi-million-dollar company that's out there, and everybody looks at the shiny, and there's so much hardship that comes along with building these companies, and nobody ever sees that part, right? And so would you just walk us through what that post was and what went with it? Because it blew my mind, and it's part of my goal, especially with women, because the lane is not equal, right, to how men get to success and women. And so I would love for you to just take some time and talk about what that post was and what you included and why it was important.
Yeah. Winding the clock back to end of 2022, AntFlow had been in business for just over 7 years, and we were in the process of closing a large financing. We're venture-backed, which means we've traditionally raised capital, used that capital, deployed that capital to grow faster. So as a business, as the CEO, it's my job to increase shareholder value. So I was deploying cash to grow the business 3 to 5x revenue year over year. At the end of 2022, I was in the process of closing another round of financing. And candidly, anything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And the round didn't close the way that I had anticipated it to, which meant that we had a $3 million line of credit that was expected to mature just a few months later. I had over $4 million in overdue vendor bills that I couldn't pay. And I had a team of 35 folks that I needed to hit payroll on. And we were facing what banks call the zone of insolvency. It is Claire Coder is also considering filing personal bankruptcy because business owners know when you're taking out a loan, oftentimes you're personally guaranteeing that as well.
Yep.
So I'm staring down the end of this tunnel at the end of 2022. It was really, really hard. I am so proud to say that we turned it around. I had to run a really, really heart-wrenching layoff in January, so January of 2023, where we cut back our workforce by over 40%. And I had to call every single one of our suppliers and give them my word because I had nothing else that I would make the payments, but I needed to do it over a longer period of time. and also call the bank and navigate what a different type of payment plan would look like. Thankfully, I've been working with most of those suppliers for a long time, and somehow they believed me. And now we're at a state where we've paid off all of the line of credit. We have no debt. We paid back all of our suppliers. We're in good standing with each. The layoff was really complicated, but now we have a very strong team, and we are locked in and running fast, and we're now profitable. That was the journey. And I did share publicly, after most of it was resolved, I shared, some of the hard shit. I shared publicly that there was a moment where we were in a time of really like, oh shit. And I shared this because I hadn't heard it from others. And I didn't know if anybody else had, but I felt like they had to have. And once again, it doesn't have to be the way that it's always been. So I felt compelled to change the status quo and share my story. Part of the reason that folks elect not to share the hard shit is because people want to believe that it's all good, especially customers that pay you a lot of money. Especially customers that rely on you to have service, especially customers that make a big bet on you. Any corporation that selects a startup as their service provider is making a big bet. And there was a lot of concern that I received from customers when I shared that post. Reasonably so, right? They want to make sure that what they've invested in, right? Like our dispensers are designed to only fit our period products. If Clear Coat or an Amflow go out of business, they're not going to have supply to fit their tampon and pad dispensers. Reasonably, they were nervous. And so I too am still finding that balance of sharing important stories to help our next generation and our current generation of business owners, but also making sure that it is a responsible act, so that our customers and our clients and our stakeholders feel really good about where we are. And once again, to just tie this all in a bow, I am really proud. Amflow is now in a stronger position than we've ever been. We have a very healthy balance sheet. We've turned this ship around, and it is phenomenal. But I don't know when it's appropriate to share the hardships, because even though the company is phenomenal, every single day there's a new peak and valley, as we all understand in our lives. And I'm still interested in exploring what that combination is, because I certainly don't have it right yet.
The humanness of that post, though, is what was so intriguing to myself, and maybe as somebody who has also been through some hardships personally and professionally, within my business as well. It meant so much to see it. And so I agree with you, that line can feel like here it is and then it moves, right? And so what is something you would change about it? And, what are you suggesting potentially to others when they find themselves close to this? Like, what would you have changed different, and what would you hold on to?
Change about the post?
Yeah. Or how you handled it. Like, I love these experiences, right? Like, I love the humanness, but at the same time, like, this very vulnerable moment. What would you have changed, and what would you keep about it?
Yeah. Well, I get why people don't share shit until they're writing your memoir, right? Like, I get that too. But, that's complicated, right? One of my favorite stories in books is by Andy Dunn. He wrote a book called Burn Rate, and he founded the company. Oh my gosh, I'm even blanking on the name of the company. Was it Bonobos?
That's okay. We'll find it. We'll get it in the show notes.
We'll find the name of the company. But anyways, the whole book is about his mental health challenges. But the book was not published until he sold his company to Walmart. Right? And I think that that's what's really complicated, and especially for women, because oddly, when you have a consumer brand as a company, women are more likely to be the face of the company. So then you now have three roles. You have founder, you have CEO, and you have evangelist. Now you're wearing three hats instead of like maybe one or two. And I think that that's really complicated as well, is that combination of your other two competing roles, founder and CEO, those are already direct at conflict. Founders are required to push to the limits and break and take very risky bets. CEOs are required to stabilize, operate with a level of calmness. And then evangelists are supposed to share wild, exciting stories. So your three roles are at direct odds with folks. And I still have not, once again, found that balance. So what would I do again? I sometimes consider not sharing anything net new until I take to my next phase in my career. I get why that is. But I also still get really excited to share stories so that other folks that are in it day to day can get inspired and feel seen and heard, which is also another part of my job, which is the evangelism aspect. So I'm mulling through it actively, as you can tell.
Yeah. I love that you shared it. And so many people in this entrepreneurship game, right, already do struggle with their mental health. There is this, line still between personal and professional, and, this level of inflation, right? Like that this is where it really is, but not really. And so at times it can feel so fake. And it's what I've enjoyed about your journey is the authentic piece of it. And I get that there's a fine line in it, but it meant a lot to me. I know it meant a lot to others. And I believe so much more humanness is trying to find its way into entrepreneurship in business. But, we're all maneuvering and pioneering through it real time because we have social media. We have, mental health being at the top level of priority for all of us. And so it's even for this podcast, right? The Mama Trauma Barbie podcast, and especially for women in all of these different roles that we hold. And so it is really difficult, but the sacrifice is worth it, in my opinion, to start having some of these really hard conversations or losing some things along the way. And they can be costly. But I do understand that when we're in different maybe phases of the game or phases of the journey, that there is more at stake. And those things do need to be taken into consideration. But it is rocky as we're on uncharted territory here with even more women getting into business. But I know that we've all decided that, we don't want to do it like a man. And we are running as fast as we can, right? Little Taylor Swift hit there. But, it's not working the way that we've done it. And so I think it is going to feel uncomfortable at times with trying to put some of this out there because it does need to change.
Alicia, I actually don't even think that it's a male versus female question. Everyone right now is grappling with how much they share personally and professionally. I think men especially have a unique challenge because they have not even shared emotionally.
Exactly.
And now as consumers, we do have some level of expectation that folks are humans. Mm-hmm. We now expect that. You're seeing CEOs move from folks that only showed up on earnings calls and earnings days to CEOs that are now expected to be present and aware and comforting. You see that not just with CEOs, but also we have that similar expectation to our community leaders, to our world leaders. And we're all challenged with finding that combination of personal and professional. And I'm excited to see where it lands. And the pendulum is swinging really far both ways.
It is.
And candidly, I think it'd be a hell of a lot easier to just be professional. I think, remove the whole personal thing. I do think it would be a lot easier to just stay in my black turtleneck and operate as a CEO without the emotional aspect. But we know that the consumer needs that humanness to continue to build loyalty and trust with the brand. And so it's a fascinating combination that's still playing out.
It is. And you said it earlier, COVID has certainly blown the doors off of all of this and has sped up the process. I was speaking with some friends the other day, though, and it was like, we felt like we were moving in the right direction, male or female, because you're right. Like there's plenty of men now that are looking around and it's like, wait, this isn't working either, right? I do want to spend more time with my kids, or if they don't even have kids, right? Like their mental health is important. So again, we are pioneering out here. COVID has blown the doors off and we're all finding our way through it. But, vulnerability being such a key component of leadership, that really just leaning in and meeting people where they are. And I appreciate you sharing that story, because entrepreneurship is difficult and there are real challenges along the way. And so I certainly appreciated you posting that and sharing it with your network as a way for so many of us to just realize that we're not alone out here. And maybe that's half the challenge at the time. And I know for me, if there's certain things that I feel like I can't share, it's really finding that person that you can go to, which is such, so important for so many people. And so if you don't have that person, finding out who it is, because you can't share necessarily everything online, but it can be a lonely journey the higher and higher you go. And so I'm sure you have definitely some of those individuals in your life as well. So let's jump into hard conversations. We kind of just talked about that, but I mean, you're talking about menstruation. I remember when I worked at Pfizer and I sold Viagra, and I had to talk about erectile dysfunction on a regular basis. And so it's funny because I think that's part of my vulnerability now, and why I'm able to have hard conversations is because I was at a point in my career, in my life at a very young age, where I was having difficult conversations, and you as well, starting off in your 20s, talking about menstruation. And so I know you walk into meetings, or I know that you have scenarios where you're in that I'm sure the conversation that you're having, while very important, makes people uncomfortable. And so you and I, when we met a few months ago, talked about this. Like, we need to be able to have harder conversations. But, what is it that you bring to the table that when you're having these, that you're meeting people where they're at in this too?
Yeah. Look, regardless of if you menstruate or not, nobody really loves talking about menstruation. And so when our company approaches folks, we meet them where they are, and we ensure that we are not isolating. What I mean by that is sometimes feminism has looked like anti-male.
Mm-hmm.
Our company, we know that we have to all work together to make change. And so we invite everyone into the conversation. So what does that look like? At our company, AmpFlow sells into facilities managers, the same people that are purchasing toilet paper, tissue, paper towels, etc. Those are our primary buyers. Think of your head janitor at your school. Think of the head of commercial real estate at your company. They are likely non-menstruators, right? They're likely men, but men have daughters. Men have wives. Men have sisters. Everyone loves someone who menstruates. And that's where we start. We start with our common ground. Everyone loves someone who menstruates. And then we start asking questions that are relevant to them. Have you ever been asked to find a period product? What does your current day-to-day look like when you have to empty out the quarter-operated dispenser? Have you ever tried to reload those dispensers? What is your experience with that? Help us understand. Are you aware that 1 in 4 students in the United States cannot afford tampons and pads because they are not covered by WIC and food stamps? Are you aware that offering free period products in schools increases attendance amongst girls? These are all conversations that we invite folks into. And by the end of the conversation, there's really 2 paths. It's either, wow, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Let me know where the contract is. Or, wow, I am a single dad and I have 2 daughters, and I did not previously feel equipped to have these conversations. Please let me know what I can be doing too as a dad. We're grateful to now have a whole series of flow bros. We call our guys that support AmpFlow flow bros, who are engaged in the menstrual movement. And what that looks like is having a little basic necessities kit with them, filled with AmpFlow tampons and pads, that are in a car or available in a first aid kit at the kids' soccer practice. Those are ways to demonstrate allyship and support of the menstrual movement. Alicia, I have something unfortunate to tell you.
Tell me.
It's not the men that hold the deals back. It's actually other women. The saddest part of my job is that oftentimes when we are working in HR, women who are traditionally menopausal have been told their entire lives, don't talk about menstruation. It's your own responsibility. I did it my whole life and I got by just fine, so why do we have to change it? Those are the stakeholders that do not advance ant flow for organizations. We have had other women turn down the opportunity for an entire Fortune 100 company by other women. I mean, one woman who is the chief HR officer at the organization, she said no, and no other women then at that organization got access to ant flow because her decision was, it's not necessary. I got by just fine. We don't need to make the change. And that's really what I think we all need to think about when we talk about supporting each other and allyship. Just because it was hard for you doesn't mean that you need to make it hard for the next generation. And certainly, raising money at Antflow was very hard for me. When I started raising money back in 2017, 2018, there were not a lot of women-focused venture capital firms. Now, there are dozens. There's a list of over 100 woman-owned venture capital firms that are investing in pre-seed, early-stage companies. That was not a reality when I started my company early on. But that does not mean that I am not going to help the next generation, so the next woman-owned business work on their pitch deck to pitch these firms. Just because it was hard for you does not mean you need to make it hard for your next generation. And that's really what I think about consistently, and kind of circling back to where we started. What does it look like to support other women? That's what it looks like.
I think it's listening, right? Like, we all have different experiences and perspectives. And so one of the reasons, even circling back to the beginning of our conversation, that I helped you was because I didn't have a lot of people who helped me. And I knew what that felt like. And I knew that there was a springboard that who knew, right? Like where you would go. But I knew in that moment I had an opportunity, and just listening to understand. And again, having been through what I have with my daughter, it helps me everywhere else in my life. And so I'm hopeful that, maybe one of the just biggest takeaways for all of us today, for the women and men potentially listening to this, is that let's just listen to understand. Like, let's listen before we speak to really understand how certain things not only need to help us, but it's helping other people. Like, it really is that whole love your neighbor concept. Like, it's not about us. Giving is receiving, and giving other people the opportunity to feel better, be better, do better. That's how our world gets better. So I'm glad that you circled back with this. And as women at every generation and every opportunity, let's just all go into 2024, taking a really big, solid, deep breath and really looking at the women and individuals around us and figuring out, where's my part and what can I do? So you brought up venture capital funding. It's a preconceived notion that that's the only way to get there. And so I was talking with Megan Reichert from Mercy Innovations the other day, and I did not know this, but, it's like 8% of businesses are only traditionally funded through venture capital, funds. And so I did not know that. And so I think it is good if you could walk us through, like, yes, there's venture capital funding available. It sounds like there are about 100 different organizations out there that exist now for women specifically to get funding. But can you walk us through why you might consider going that route? And if not, what are some, different strategies to go for if you want to launch a company?
Yeah. Sometimes you need capital to grow your business. I get that, and I see that. There are a variety of different paths to grow your business. One of the paths is venture capital. Venture capital expects 10 to 100x returns on their money. So if they invest $1 million in your company, they expect that within 3 to 7 years, you will return $10 to $100 million to their fund. So you have to be high growth. That is not a financial vehicle for lifestyle businesses, for companies that are growing single-digit percentages in revenue year over year. That's not what venture capital is for. The next bucket is traditional loans or bank loans. The SBA is really traditional there. They might be loans that you personally guarantee of around $100,000 to $250,000. These are really great if you're purchasing equipment for a restaurant, if you're investing in some technology to get started. Another area that could be interesting if you're a health company or creating innovation that could be beneficial for the military. Fun fact, the military is actually one of the largest U.S. startup funds in the United States. There are tons of funding resources to get grants through the military, through the NIH, which is the National Health Organization. You can look at their websites and understand if what you're creating could be eligible for some of their funding, which is non-dilutive. It's essentially a grant. And then the last bucket of funding that's relatively common is friends and family. When I was starting Antflow, I was 18. Look, I didn't have a network of friends and family that were interested in funding my business. So this might be access to you. It might not be access to you. Friends and family could invest in your company, take a portion of your company, perhaps get dividends over time. But they don't have perhaps as expansive expectations on returns as a venture capital firm does. And they might offer some additional flexibility on what those terms might look like. Perhaps it's a loan that converts into equity. Perhaps it's a long-term loan that the SBA might not be able to support. Perhaps it's an investment in the company, and then after a certain amount of time, it could be producing dividends. So those are just 4 of the many different types of capital that could be helpful for your business. But really thinking about what your what your style of business is and your growth profile will likely dictate what type of capital is appropriate for your company.
Yeah, that was a fantastic overview. Thank you so much. And, something I wanted to hit real quick, and we only have a couple of minutes, is a lot of people get into entrepreneurship because, again, they see that shiny side of it. I get to have my own schedule. I get to be my own boss. But what a lot of people don't talk about, and it's why we spent so much time on that post that you did, is there's a lot of work in this. And so you really, it's your other baby, and you got to feed it. You got to take care of it. And so a lot of times where I see women get in trouble is they want to go this route because they think they're going to have more flexibility. And sure, maybe in certain industries that is the case, but especially if you're going for partnerships or, you are going for larger sums of venture capital, funding, like there is a path that you're going to go down, and it is to be expected that there are sacrifices. And again, I think as women, there's trajectory and things that it's always been done, like we talked about, that we want to see change in that. But I see so many women and their businesses fail because they think it's going to be easier, and it ends up being harder.
Oh yeah, entrepreneurship is the hardest path. You spend a ton of money to make no money at the beginning. You don't have one boss. You actually have seemingly hundreds of bosses because your employees become your boss, your customers become your boss, your partners become your boss, and your board becomes your boss. So you go from maybe one boss to hundreds, and you are responsible for the outcomes. You are responsible for the outcomes. There's no turning to Joe or Sally and asking for them to stay through the weekend to get a product shipped. It is you. You are where everything stops. So if you're looking to entrepreneurship as the easy way out or some opportunities to lighten your load, I highly recommend that is not the path to go. And if somebody does think that it's the path to go, maybe I need to learn from them, because that's certainly not my experience.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times people want to get out of corporate to go start their own business, and, just really exploring what the skill sets are needed in order to be a successful entrepreneur. And there's no shame in being in corporate and wanting to continue up the ladder. There's no shame in wanting to maybe step out and try it and figure out it's not for you. It's a lot. And we need every player in every seat, right, making this whole thing work out here in the real world. And so I just wanted to go through that a little bit, because I think it's truly, people say, well, women are starting businesses faster, than other demographics out there. But at the same time, they're failing. And so that's a whole other podcast for another day. But I appreciate you walking through that, going through the funding. And so again, we're coming up on our time, but I'd love to hear, what are your 3 biggest takeaways since you started, Claire?
3 biggest takeaways. 1 is consistency. Businesses stay in business because you consistently show up every single day. 2 is that education is expensive. You're going to pay for your education, whether it's college, whether it's a master's, or whether it's starting your own business and not reading a contract fully and being screwed out of money. Education is very expensive. And third, and most important, is find your cohort, find your team, and rely on that team, trust that team, and build that team. And by team, I don't necessarily mean your employees or your workforce, but your council, the Alicia Wagner Council, the Claire Coder Council. These are the 3 to 5 people that you turn to when you don't know who to ask for advice, and your entire world is going through shit. Find your team. Those are my 3 things.
You are a gift, and it has been an absolute privilege watching your journey. Thank you for letting me be a part of it. Thank you for being so vulnerable, and thank you for the profound difference and legacy that you are leaving out here in the world to make sure that every woman has the opportunity to go through this life with a tampon or a pad being easily accessible, my friend. So thank you for the tenacity and consistency that you have continued to bring to Aunt Flo, and just thank you for being a ridiculously amazing human being.
Thank you so much. Woohoo!
Join me next week as we welcome Dr. Taylor Manus, owner of Precision Spinal Care. He helps us debunk chiropractic myths one crack at a time. Get ready to laugh, learn, and discover the truths behind adjustments. Thank you, Precision Chiropractic, Jennifer Panzician with Edward Jones, Dutch Maids, the Avalon Foundation, and Chica Creative for believing in better care, better support, and better outcomes for mamas and their families in the real world. The information provided in the podcast is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical, health, or nutritional advice.